So, a few days ago, without really much fanfare, interestingly enough, or really a build-up at all, Bullet Witch, a game from 2006, arrived on Steam, arrived on PC. Which is kind of an interesting choice, because there wasn't really much of a call, or really even a memory, for this game for most people. And the developer and publisher for this are set as Xseed and Marvelous Games, respectively. Which is kind of interesting. I assume that those are the ones who actually developed and funded the PC port of this game. Now, Bullet Witch, like I said, was a game that was released in 2006. This is a 12-year-old game, and it was originally it was an Xbox 360 exclusive back then. That was actually developed by Cavia. Cavia, for those of you who don't know, are the developers of the Drakengard games and eventually the Nier series. So they have quite a pedigree nowadays, although of course that wasn't 100% the case when this game was released. Really, the Drakengard games, a couple of them, were available at this time. Nier didn't quite exist yet. But their kind of penchant for somewhat over-the-top characters, odd stories, and Gothic-esque fantasy, a very dark fantasy style, was established at this point, and this game does follow that scheme. However, it didn't really get an amazing reception at the time. It wasn't that everyone thought it was horrible, it was just that it definitely wasn't up to the kind of standard that they had set for themselves, I suppose you could say. Although, to be fair, the original Drakengard didn't really get an amazing reception either when it first came out. And I guess you could say that Cavia's games aren't really for everyone. And yeah, basically Bullet Witch has its fair share of problems. And it's, I think, kind of a fun game for what it is, but it's definitely not an absolutely fantastic game. It has some pretty not great AI. The voice acting is terrible, and as you can probably see, graphically it's not amazing. And yes, it is 12 years old, but even saying that, back when it was released, it still didn't look incredible, although some of the effects really did genuinely look very good when this game came out. The spell effects for like the great magics, like lightning and tornado, were really pretty cool. However, that's not really what I'm here to talk about. I find it very strange that of all the games to suddenly come to PC, a 12-year-old Xbox 360 exclusive from a, I think now defunct, if I'm not mistaken, company, just suddenly shows up. I don't really know why it shows up, but before we go into the potential implications of that, let's just talk about the game. So, what is Bullet Witch? Bullet Witch is a third-person shooter that takes a kind of half-realistic third-person shooter, half-dark fantasy with magic style. You play Alicia, who is, well, the Bullet Witch, who has some of the most awful voice acting you'll ever hear in a video game in your entire life, and uses this gun rod, which is one of the kind of morph weapon style of weapons that you see in video games sometimes, which I often really, really like. They're pretty fun. You could say they're sort of lazy because they give the developers an excuse to not make as many weapon models, but I think they're still really cool. And, I mean, the Jak and Daxter series use them to great effect, so why not? You have 4 different forms for this weapon, and they are actually pretty fun. They're kind of standard, I guess you could say, for a third-person shooter, but because they aren't just normal, you know, hand size weapons, and instead they're like giant arm-sized cannons, effectively, they're kind of more fun than their traditional versions. They're obviously meant to look like a broomstick, because she's a witch, get it? Har har. That's the joke, but that kind of makes them fun. This right here is a shotgun, and because it's basically a shot cannon, it's sort of fun. You get really up close and just blow dudes away like halfway across the level. That's pretty enjoyable. This is your basic form, which is meant to be an assault rifle style of role, so it's just kind of good at everything, but not great at anything. And has quite a quick reload time and everything. It's just, you know, not amazing at anything, but it's just really general purpose. And is fun to use because of that. This is the cannon, which is a very much a sniper rifle style of role, but it's only able to zoom in like this if you use the element shot magic, which we'll talk about in a minute. Other than that, it normally can only zoom in this far, and it's actually not the best sniper rifle you'll ever see, because it has quite a bit of spread to it, because it is technically still a cannon and not a sniper rifle, so you do have to bear that in mind. It's got some spread. It's more like an anti-material rifle than a sniper rifle per se, but it's a lot of fun to use. And then there is the Gatling, which you'll see later, which is a machine of destruction, and chews through ammo really, really fast, but kills everything in front of you very quickly. However, it also slows you down a lot to aim it. You gotta walk real slow, because it's probably very heavy, I would imagine. You've also got an entire arsenal of magic at your disposal. You can see those two bars up there. You can probably guess what they are by now, but the top one is your health, and the bottom one is your mana. And these are very relevant in terms of how they work, because they're a little bit different than you might traditionally think for a third-person shooter of the time. The little white, sort of stone-looking pip dealy-majig at the end of the bar represents the maximum that it can go to at the time. Different attacks can actually reduce your maximum health, and it regenerates fairly quickly, but the maximum health stops it from regenerating all the time to as far as it can always go. So once it hits that maximum bar, it will regenerate much more slowly for a while, although honestly you're very powerful in this game. This game makes you feel just horrifically overpowered, which is kind of amazing. Honestly, I think there's something to say for a game that makes you feel this overpowered. It's a lot of fun. And not a lot can really threaten you, to be honest. There are a very specific number of things that can threaten you, and again, that's another thing we'll talk about in a few. But most of the time, you are just sort of a goddess of death and can walk around destroying everything in your path without much of a worry. That, of course, does mean the game is fairly easy most of the time, but it is very fun as a result, because you just have so much at your disposal that you can use to destroy everything. The bottom one, being your mana, works a bit differently. When you cast a spell, most spells actually reduce not just how much you have, but also your maximum. And you need to kill enemies to recharge your maximum available mana. So not all of your spells will always be available to you. Just because your mana regenerates doesn't mean that you can actually use all of it, because you have to also kill enemies to recharge how much it can regenerate too, if that makes sense. So, about your spells. You have quite an arsenal of them available to you, and this is where the game gets really interesting. Besides just the fairly cool, but I suppose somewhat limited, because 4 is kind of a small number, even though they're pretty cool, arsenal of weapons, you've got quite a lot of spells, and about 9, I believe. And that's one right there. It's sort of a mobile cover style of spell called Ancient Wall. You can just summon up a wall basically anytime you want to, as long as there's nothing directly blocking the path. And it allows you to just, make some cover. If there's no cover that you want where you want it, you can have some whenever you need. And you can level up all of these spells between 3 different levels, each one upping its power in some way. And the more you up the power of the Ancient Wall, the more bullets it can take before it disintegrates. You've also got this, the Element Shot, and every single weapon has an element. The assault rifle is fire, so its bullets get more powerful and set dudes on fire. Pretty easy to understand. The cannon is light, which makes it pinpoint accurate. It basically becomes a sniper rifle at that point. It can also zoom in twice, as you saw earlier. It can have a much farther zoom. And you only get 4 shots with it at that point, as you probably saw. But they are pinpoint accurate, and unlike most of the other weapons that they actually have a travel time, they fire actual projectiles. It becomes a hit scan weapon. It shoots a hit scan, basically a laser, that hits instantaneously over any distance. That was hilarious. And it is very, very strong. It will one-shot most enemies, and the ones that it doesn't will make very quick work of over a very, very vast distance. And that can be upgraded to effectively one-shot just about anything in the game. And the other 2 weapons are pretty hilarious once they're upgraded enough. The shotgun is wind elemental, so the wind elemental shotgun, as you probably saw earlier, well, I said earlier that the shotgun blows people away from up close. That makes it literally blow people away, because it basically fires a small sort of tornado of pellets in front of you. And the more highly upgraded it is, you just saw it at level 1 in this video, so the more highly upgraded it is, the more literal it becomes, and it will eventually just sort of push everything in front of you very strongly away. and do a lot of damage. And the already massively overpowered Gatling is lightning elemental, and the lightning chains it jumps to other enemies as you actually fire at them, so it becomes a chain lightning Vulcan, essentially, which, if that sounds very fun to use, it is, and is making an already overpowered weapon just an engine of death, so use that all the time, basically. As you can see here, this is actually the Gatling, and you can see that when you aim it, you walk very, very slowly, which is a way of balancing it. And yes, you do have a melee attack. It's actually not useless, although these enemies have a lot of health, so it takes a while to kill them. So yeah, the Chain Lightning Vulcan is a thing of beauty when enemies are clustered together. It just kills all of them very quickly. It makes the weapon much more ammo efficient, as ammo efficient is something that fires this quickly can be. Your other spells include things like Sacrifice, which you saw earlier, which is this game's version of a revive. Allows you to find multiple enemies and find multiple allies that are not actually dead yet, but they're in a sort of downed state where they need to be brought back up. And instead of like a medical syringe or something like that, like in a lot of other third-person shooters, you actually spray blood on them to revive them, because that's just the theme of the game. It's a very like Gothic fantasy game, so yeah, you have demonic powers, spray blood on them. That's how it works, which is kind of funny, so why not? Do it. And here it is, actually. There you go. Sacrifice, spray your blood on them, and they are magically healed, because that's how it works, I guess. And you also got that you saw earlier, the Rose Spear, which is actually a lot of fun to use. It's effectively an impalement grenade, more or less. You toss a rose forward, and after about half a second delay, a bunch of thorn-covered spears rise from the ground around the rose and impale any enemies around them. And if that's not enough, the spears that actually catch enemies also then catch on fire, because apparently just impaling things isn't enough. They are very effective, and they effectively, that was redundant, they essentially play the role of a frag grenade in a traditional third-person shooter. You know, you see a cluster of enemies that you want to take out all at once, and or you see a bunch of enemies behind cover that you can't get to with your normal firearm, so you toss one of these to get to them. It's the same thing, more or less, as a grenade. That right there is one of the most annoying enemies in the game. That was a sharpshooter. If you saw that red laser and you actually let it center on you, it will kill you instantly. It doesn't matter how much health you have, they will kill you instantaneously. They're very annoying, and they basically grind the pace of the game to an absolute halt as soon as they appear, which is, in my opinion, one of the worst parts about the game. The game I actually like quite a bit. It is a very fun romp through an experience that is quite varied because of your arsenal that just allows you to have fun, just a bunch of overpowered fun. Occasionally, though, you come across some instances where you definitely feel like the design may have taken a strange turn, namely those sharpshooters and those brains that you saw. The sharpshooters can kill you instantaneously from any range as long as they can see you, if it takes you too long to find them and you don't find cover in time. Which is very annoying, because oftentimes, unlike that guy, they're very hard to see. Especially on some of the forest levels where they're hidden in bushes and things. Or there are two of them at a time, which can happen, and they're like laser beams are crossing and you genuinely can't tell where they're coming from. I wish they just did a bunch of damage instead, but it doesn't matter, they actually just kill you no matter what. And the other thing is those brains. You probably saw them lifting up telekinetically a bunch of objects. The game is very odd about the objects telekinetically moving. But first let me show you some ancient magic here. This is the great magic, to show you some of the other stuff you've got at your disposal, and it's all really impressive. You've got things like just the ability to summon up a massive tornado whenever you want, as long as you have the MP for it. And yeah, it destroys your mana gauge, but it's really cool. This was actually one of the more impressive parts of the game 12 years ago. You can do this anywhere at actually some pretty scripted looking levels of destruction that you can just do wherever you want. It's not scripted at all. It will lift up cars, pieces of buildings, throw around big water tanks and semis and all kinds of stuff. It's actually really cool. And here's an example, by the way, after that cool display of the unfortunate nature of the insta-kills. Just a split second of not knowing where that guy was, and that's all it took. Very annoying. But also, like I was saying, the scripted nature, speaking of the objects that are telekinetically thrown by those brains. I think they're called walnut heads or something like that. They drag objects towards them, and during that process of being dragged towards them, they do damage to you, which makes sense because they're, fast-moving, telekinetically controlled objects, so they're gonna hurt you. But then when they throw them towards you after holding them in the air for a second, it doesn't matter how fast the objects are moving, they will instantly kill you, even from full health, no matter what. They could be moving at like 3 miles an hour. If they just barely tap you, they'll kill you. Which is really obnoxious, and I don't know why. It's like the game doesn't... It's like it's overcompensating for how powerful it knows you are, so it must put some insta-kill things in your way at some points, and it's obnoxious. Like, why? Why do you need to do this? Willpower's a fun spell. It's a big telekinetic push. That's at level 2. At level 3, you can basically take an entire street of cars with you. It's awesome. Here's another one of those brains. I once had just to show you how ridiculous it can get, I once had a brain lift up a couple of cars in a one of those like volatile liquid semi-trailers that's obviously full of gasoline, and of course in a video game that means you can shoot it and it'll explode. So I did. I shot it, it exploded, it killed the brain. Everything the brain was holding then fell to the ground limply. The semi-trailer that I exploded bounced off of the ground. It just like weakly bounced very slightly and lifted up to like my character's shoulder level, just tapped her shoulder, and I died instantly. Just died. And I was just really surprised that just how specific the, I guess, insta-kill scripting must be for this all to happen. It just makes some of these enemies really annoying to deal with. There's just those 2 enemies, really. They're just so specifically scripted to always be able to kill you at all times that it causes the game to like grind to a halt while they're on the screen. It just grinds to a halt because they can always kill you, so you have to make sure to deal with them very specifically when everything else in the game is like just a fun romp of destruction. Here's some lightning, because I hate these guys so much that I'm going to strike this brain with lightning. The lightning spell is fun because it tends to lift up all kinds of crazy debris and stuff and fling it everywhere because of how powerful the lightning is. It didn't really show the effect in this case because there's just not anything that can do that around this particular point, but, still. And I obviously couldn't end off the video without showing the new meteor spell that I got, the last great magic that you get, so I'll do that. But in the meantime, I want to talk about some of the implications of why this game exists on Steam all of a sudden. I think it's a pretty cool game. It's got its flaws, but I'm always a kind of a proponent of you don't always have to have an excuse for games that you like. If that makes sense. I'm not ashamed of liking this game. It's got its flaws. Yes, it's not perfect. I like it. I don't care. I like it. I don't always have to play the most golden, perfect games that are available at any time. I'm okay with also playing games that aren't perfect, that have some silliness to them, that are campy, that are strange, that are odd, and I still like them. I love EDF. I love, this doesn't reach the golden levels of EDF's silliness, but still, I love EDF. I love Chaos Legion, which is another game that this reminds me of because of its very dark Gothic setting, and its bad voice acting, and its weird story. Reminds me of Chaos Legion. I love things like that, and it's okay to like things like that, but why is this on Steam? A lot of times we see developers that release their ports or things like that of some of their very old titles, or older titles. Usually it's not quite this extreme, but still, the point stands. And it's because they have something new, either in that series, or just new in their catalog coming to the platform. Is that what's happening here? Are we going to see a new Marvelous or Xseed game coming to Steam? Because I don't think there's any more Bullet Witch coming to Steam, because, no one asked for Bullet Witch, as far as I know, and that's okay. I don't mind seeing Bullet Witch, I think it's cool. But, you know, like, what's going on here? I guess, am I making a mountain out of a molehill? Did they just decide they wanted to port this just because they could? Because if so, that's fine too. But surely there's a reason why this is on Steam, is what I'm saying. Also, I have some meteors. It's just an interesting exercise in what could possibly be the reason for a 12-year-old game out of nowhere to suddenly come to PC by these guys. Like, why? What's the cause for this, I guess? Because more often than not, there is a reason that a developer would do something like this, and I may have just destroyed the entire universe and killed myself with rubble because I destroyed the buildings on the pier. Maybe don't do that. Try that again. Also, I guess one other possible reason could be that there's other Cavia properties that they want to bring, but I don't think that either Marvelous or Xseed actually owns those IPs. The other ones would be Nier, which Square Enix owns the rights to the original Nier, I'm pretty sure. And the other ones would be Drakengard, which I'm pretty sure Square Enix also owns Drakengard, I think, right? So I'm pretty sure that's not it. So yeah, anyone have any idea why that could be? Like, what's the deal here? Because I'm genuinely interested to know, and I'd like to understand the future of this decision, I guess. Either way, Bullet Witch is on PC, and if you want to grab it, it's available for a very fair price with all of the original DLC, and the port is a little spotty here and there, but it's definitely playable. It's $15 right now. The link will be in the description below, and you can go and play it. It's actually pretty... It's a solid game for this price, I would say. It's an enjoyable trip back to the past, and hey, at 12 years old, I think it's still playable for $15. Give it a shot. Thank you guys very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Any questions, comments, feel free to make them, and I'll see you guys next time.